Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Right. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General, and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself of non-human origin craft?
Yes, I personally interviewed those individuals.
Are you aware of any individuals that are participating in reverse engineering programs for non-terrestrial craft?
Personally, yes.
I am so damn tired of being lied to. I don't think I can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore.
Hello, my friend, and thank you for listening to the 278th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And this episode is a summary of the UFO hearings, or UAP hearings. You know, I'm sure they're going to have another abbreviation for flying aliens soon enough. But the point is that Congress has had 3 hearings now on unidentified aerial phenomenon. We are going to go with UAP in this episode. But they've had 3 hearings over the course of the last year and a half, and the latest one was a doozy. And so today, I'm going to play for you the most interesting parts of all of those hearings, organized in a way that is probably going to be much easier to follow, and which will save you hours of time that you would have spent listening to insufferable politician speeches. And in this episode, you're going to hear testimony from 3 Pentagon officials and 3 whistleblowers. And I do want to emphasize that the Pentagon testimony was before the whistleblower testimony. And so these people were not all testifying at the same time and responding to each other, even though my edits might make it sound sometimes like they were. And so if you want to hear this testimony in full and unedited, I have provided links to all of the hearings and all my other sources in this episode's show notes for you, including every article and video referenced by the witnesses. And I've included timestamps and transcripts of the unedited clips so you can easily find them within the hearings and listen to them in context. I do think that you can trust my edits, though, because this podcast is funded by you and not some Pentagon grant or via corporate ad money. And so I really have no financial incentive to hide anything from you or to approach this with any kind of agenda. But I do understand that trust is earned, and so that's why I make it as easy as possible for you to find these hearings and watch them in whole or in part in order to check my work and make sure that you find my edits to be fair. And you can find those sources in the show notes on congressionaldish.com, along with all of the ways that you can support this podcast. Because I got to tell you, I cannot turn episodes around as fast as I turned around this one without having the help that comes from Claire and Mike and Lauren and Mark, and even from Brian, who's our artist who is forever watching over all of us. I could not keep doing this without them, and I could not have done this for all these years without them, and I can't keep doing this work without them if you don't pay for the show. And so thank you to all the producers who have made the show possible up until this point. And if you're not supporting the show yet, well, there's no better time to start than today, because today's episode is literally out of this world. See what I did there? So let's get started with some testimony from the Pentagon. In this first clip, you're going to hear from Ronald Moultrie, and he is the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security at the Department of Defense, where he has served in this position since June of 2021. You're also going to hear from Scott Bray, who is the Deputy Director of U.S. Naval Intelligence since January of 2020. This testimony took place on May 17, 2022 in the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, their subcommittee on counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and counterproliferation. So let's get started with Ronald Moultrie.
What are UAP? Put simply, UAP are airborne objects that, when encountered, cannot be immediately identified. It is the department's contention that by combining appropriately structured, collected data with rigorous scientific analysis, any object that we encounter can likely be isolated, characterized, identified, and, if necessary, mitigated.
As detailed in the ODNI report, if and when individual UAP incidents are resolved, they likely fall into one of 5 potential explanatory categories: airborne clutter, natural atmospheric phenomena, U.S. government or U.S. industry developmental programs, foreign adversary systems, or a other bin that allows for a holding bin of difficult cases and for the possibility of surprise and potential scientific discovery.
And here's Representative Rick Crawford of Arkansas speaking to Scott Bray, who again is the Deputy Director of U.S. Naval Intelligence.
Do we have an example? Can you cite a specific example of an object that can't be explained as having been human-made or natural?
I mean, the example that I would say that is still unresolved, that I think everyone understands quite well, is the 2004 incident from Nimitz. We have data on that, and it simply remains unresolved.
Well, one of the people who was personally involved in that incident off of the USS Nimitz testified to the House Oversight Committee Subcommittee on National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs just this week on July 26th. And so now I'm going to play the testimony of Commander David Fravor. He is a former commanding officer, so very high ranking, of the United States Navy. And for the past 12 years, he's been an aerospace consultant on mission management systems for drones, both manned and unmanned. And in this sequence of testimony, he's going to be asked questions by, in this order, Representative Nick Langworthy of New York, Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee, Representative Jared Moskowitz of Florida, Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland, and then we'll go back to Representative Langworthy before we're done. All right, so here is Commander David Fravor.
As you know, my name is David Fravor. I'm a retired commander in the United States Navy. In 2004, I was a commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, the world-famous Black Aces. We were attached to Carrier Air Wing 11, stationed on board the USS Nimitz, and had begun a 2-month workup cycle off the coast of California. On this day, we were scheduled for a 2v2 air-to-air training with the USS Princeton as our control. When we launched off Nimitz, my wingman was joining up. We were told that the training was going to be suspended, and we were going to proceed with real-world tasking. As we proceeded to the west, the air controller was counting down the range to an object that we were going to, and we were unaware of what we were going to see when we arrived. The controller had told us that these objects had been observed for over 2 weeks, coming down from over 80,000 feet, rapidly descending to 20,000 feet, hanging out for hours, and then going straight back up. For those who don't realize, above 80,000 feet is space. We arrived at the location at approximately 20,000 feet, and the controller called merge plot, which means that our radar blip was now in the same resolution cell as the contact. As we looked around, we noticed that we saw some whitewater off our right side. It's important to note that the weather on this day was as close to perfect as you could ask for off the coast of San Diego. Clear skies, light winds, calm seas, no white caps from waves. So the whitewater stood out in a large blue ocean. All 4 of us, because we were in F-18Fs, so we had pilots and Wizzo in the back seat, looked down a small, saw a white tic-tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving very abruptly over the water like a ping-pong ball. So we got within a half mile of the tic-tac, which people say that's pretty far, but in airplanes that's actually relatively close. No, it was perfectly white, smooth, no windows, although when we did take the original FLIR video that is out there, when you put it on a big screen, it actually had 2 little objects that came out of the bottom of it. But other than that, no windows, no seams, no nothing. There were no rotors, no rotor wash, or any sign of visible control surfaces like wings.
Did this object come up on radar or interfere with your radar or the USS Princeton?
The Princeton tracked it, the Nimitz tracked it, the E-2 tracked it. We never saw it on our radars. Our fire control radars never picked it up. The other airplane that took the video did get it on a radar. As soon as it tried to lock it, it jammed the radar, spit the lock, and he rapidly switched over to the targeting pod, which you can do in the F-18. My crew that launched after we landed experienced significant jamming to the APG-73 radar. which was what we had on board, which is a mechanically scanned, very high-end system prior to the APG-79. And yes, it did pretty much everything you could do: range, velocity, aspect, and then it spit the lock, and the targeting pod is passive. That's what we were able to get the video on.
I'm about to run out of time, but are you aware of any of our enemies that have that capability?
No. As we started clockwise towards the object, my Wizzo and I decided to go down and take a closer look with the other aircraft staying on high cover to observe both us and the Tic Tac. We proceeded around the circle about 90 degrees from the start of our descent, and the object suddenly shifted its longitudinal axis, aligned it with my aircraft, and began to climb. We continued down another 270 degrees, nose low, where the Tic Tac, or we considered 270 degrees to where, and we went nose low to where the Tic Tac would have been. Our altitude at this point was about 15,000 feet, and the Tic Tac was about 12,000. As we pulled nose onto the object, within about a half mile of it, it rapidly accelerated in front of us and disappeared. Our wingmen, roughly 8,000 feet above us, lost contact also. We immediately turned back to see where the whitewater was at, and it was gone also.
Mr. Favor, do you believe that you witnessed an additional object under the water in relation to your encounter?
I will say we did not see an object. There was something there to cause the whitewater, and when we turned around, it was gone, so there was something there that obviously moved.
Okay, it was not the same object, though, that you were looking at, correct?
No, we actually joked that the Tic Tac was communicating with something when we came back, and because the whitewater disappeared. So as you started to turn back towards the east, the controller came up and said, "Sir, you're not going to believe this, but that thing is at your cat point roughly 60 miles away in less than a minute." You can calculate the speed.
What about G-forces? Let's talk about G-forces of those vehicles. Could a human survive those G-forces with known technology today?
No.
No, not for the acceleration rates that we observed. We returned to Nimitz. We were taking off our gear. We were talking to one of my crews that was getting ready to launch. We mentioned it to them, and they went out and luckily got the video that you see, that 90-second video. What you don't see is the radar tape that was never released, and we don't know where it's at.
What was your general attitude or perspective on the UFO discussion before that happened?
I never felt that we were alone with all the planets out there, but I wasn't a UFO person. I wasn't watching History Channel and MUFON and all that.
And have you had experiences or encounters since that happened?
No.
And so have you formed any general conclusions about what you think you experienced then?
Yes. I think what we experienced was, like I said, well beyond the material science and the capabilities that we had at the time, that we have currently, or that we're going to have in the next 10 to 20 years.
From what you saw that day and what you've seen on video, did you see any source of propulsion from the flying object, including on any potential thermal scans from your aircraft?
No, there's none. There's no IR plume coming out, and Chad, who took the video, went through all the EO, which is black and white TV, and the IR modes, and there's no visible signs of propulsion. It's just sitting in space at 20,000 feet.
In your career, have you ever seen a propulsion system that creates no thermal exhaust?
No.
Can you describe how the aircraft maneuvered?
Abruptly, very determinate. It knew exactly what it was doing. It was aware of our presence, and it had acceleration rates. I mean, it went from 0 to matching our speed in no time at all.
Now, if the fastest plane on Earth was trying to do these maneuvers that you saw, would it be capable of doing that?
No, not even close.
And just to confirm, this object had no wings, correct?
No wings.
Now, was the aircraft that you were flying, was it armed?
No, never felt threatened at all.
If the aircraft was armed, do you believe that your aircraft or any aircraft in possession of the United States could have shot the Tic Tac down?
I'd say no. Just on the performance, it would have just left in a split second.
And the Pentagon addressed the lack of a discernible means of propulsion in a lot of these reportings in the hearing from last year. So here's Scott Bray, the Deputy Director of U.S. Naval Intelligence, testifying on May 17th, 2022.
I think I would, without discernible means of propulsion, I would say that we're not aware of any adversary that can move an object without discernible means of propulsion. The question then becomes, in many of these cases where we don't have a discernible mean of propulsion in the data that we have, in some cases There is likely sensor artifacts that may be hiding some of that. There's certainly some degree of something that looks like signature management that we have seen from some of these UAP, but I would caution. I would simply say that there are a number of events in which we do not have an explanation, and there are a small handful in which there are flight characteristics or signature management that we can't explain with the data that we have.
Alrighty then. So now let's get back to the commander's testimony. Here's David Fravor's story about the Tic Tac incident off of the USS Nimitz. And he's going to be responding to questions posed by Representative Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin.
Mr. Fravor, the Tic Tac incident that you were engaged occurred in 2004. What kind of reporting took place after that incident?
None. We had a standard debrief where the backseaters went down to our carrier intel center and briefed what had happened, and that was it. No one else talked to us, and I was in the top 20 in the battle group. No one came. The captain was aware, the admiral was aware, nothing was done.
Your commanding officers provide any sort of justification?
No, because I was the commanding officer of the squadron, so no. What is shocking to us is that the incident was never investigated. None of my crew were ever questioned. Tapes were never taken. And after a couple days, it turned into a great story with friends. It wasn't until 2009 until Jay Stratton had contacted me to investigate. Unbeknownst to all, he was part of the ATIP program in the Pentagon led by Lou Elizondo. There was an unofficial official report that came out that's now on the internet. Years later, I was contacted by the other pilot, Alex Dietrich, and asked if I'd been contacted. And I said no, but I'm willing to talk. I was contacted by Mr. Elizondo, and we talked for a short period of time, and he said we'd be in contact. A few weeks after that, I was made aware that Lou had left the Pentagon in protest and joined forces with Tom DeLonge, Chris Mellon, Steve Justice, and others to form Two Stars Academy, an organization that pressed the issue with leading industry experts and U.S. government officials. They worked with Leslie Keane, who is present today, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper to publish the articles in the New York Times 2017 New York Times, and it removed the stigma on the topic of UFOs, which is why we're here today. Those articles open the door for the government and public that cannot be closed. It has led to an interest from our elected officials who are not focused on little green men, but figuring out where these craft are, where are they from, the technology they possess, how do they operate. It also led to the Whistleblower Protection Act and the NDAA. In closing, I would like to say that the Tic Tac object we engaged in 2004 was far superior to anything that we had on time, have today, or are looking to develop in the next 10 years. If we in fact have programs that possess this technology, it needs to have oversight from those people that the citizens of this great country elected in office to represent what is best for the United States and best for the citizens. I thank you for your time.
The newspaper articles that he just mentioned are in the show notes for you. The one from the Dispatch is particularly fascinating. And as for the Whistleblower Protection Act, that is law as a part of the annually passed National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, well, the Whistleblower Protection Act protects all individuals performing work on a federal government contract, including government employees and employees of contractors and subcontractors, if they report violations of law and/or mismanagement of federal contract funds, and if they report substantial and specific dangers to health and safety. In order to be eligible for whistleblower protections, the whistleblower only needs to have a reasonable belief that the matter they're reporting on is an instance of waste or fraud involving federal funds. They are not required to provide proof. And in order to be protected, the whistleblower has to submit the report to someone on a list of people in specific positions of power, and the list includes members of Congress or an inspector general. If a whistleblower does that, the NDAA prohibits government employees or corporate bosses from firing the whistleblower, demoting the whistleblower, or otherwise discriminating against that whistleblower. And it should go without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that the whistleblower is not allowed to be physically harmed in retaliation for his or her report. And I go into this much detail on the whistleblower protections because I want you to remember them, because it's going to be important to know later in this episode. But for now, let's get back to the whistleblowers who testified about their UAP experiences this week in Congress. And so here's another story from Ryan Graves. Ryan Graves is a Boston boy and a podcaster, because it says that he's the host of the Merged podcast, according to his LinkedIn. And so obviously him and I are soulmates. But he's also a former pilot and the executive director of Americans for Safe Aerospace. And so here's his story from when he was a member of the United States Navy, and he will respond to questions posed by Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland and Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
My name is Ryan Fobbs Graves, and I'm a former F-18 pilot with a decade of service in the U.S. Navy, including 2 deployments in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Inherent Resolve. In 2014, I was an F-18 Foxtrot pilot in the Navy Fighter Attack Squadron 11, the Red Rippers, and I was stationed at NAS Oceana in Virginia Beach. After upgrades were made to our jet's radar systems, we began detecting unknown objects operating in our airspace. At first, we assumed they were radar errors, but soon we began to correlate the radar tracks with multiple onboard sensors, including infrared systems, eventually through visual ID. During a training mission in Warning Area Whiskey 72, 10 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach, 2 F-18 Super Hornets were split by a UAP. The 2 aircraft flew within about 50 feet of the object, and that was a very close visual sighting.
And you were in one of the aircraft?
I was not. I was there when the pilot landed. He canceled the mission after, and I was there. He was in the ready room with all his gear on, with his mouth open, and I asked him what the problem was, and he said he almost hit one of those darn things.
He said he was 50 feet away from it?
Yes, sir.
And his description of the object was consistent with the description you gave us before?
A dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere.
Inside of a clear sphere?
Yes.
And with no self-evident propulsion system?
No wings, no IR energy coming off of the vehicle, nothing tethering it to the ground. And that was primarily what we were experiencing out there.
Mr. Graves, again, I'd like to know, how do you know that these were not our aircraft?
Some of the behaviors that we saw in a working area, we would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's 0 airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. These same objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, and they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for. The mission commander terminated the flight immediately and returned to base. Our squadron submitted a safety report, but there was no official acknowledgement of the incident and no further mechanism to report the sightings. Soon, these encounters became so frequent that aircrew would discuss the risk of UAP as part of their regular pre-flight briefs. When we were first experiencing these objects off the eastern seaboard in the 2014 to 2015 time period, anyone that had upgraded their radar systems were seeing these objects. So there was a large number of my colleagues that were detecting these objects off the eastern seaboard. They were further correlating that information with their other onboard sensors, and many of them also had their own eye sightings as well of these objects. Now, that was our personal first-hand experience at the time. Since then, as I've engaged this topic, others have reached out to me to share their experiences, both on the military side as well as the commercial aviation side. On the military aviation side, veterans that have recently got out have shared their stories and have expressed how the objects we were seeing in 2014, 2015 continued all the way to 2019, 2020, and beyond. And so it became a generational issue for naval aviators on the eastern seaboard. This was something we were briefing to new students. This is something that was included in the notice to airmen to ensure that there was no accidents. And now with commercial aviators, they are reaching out because they're having somewhat similar experiences as our military brothers and sisters, but they do not have any reporting system that they can send us to.
On top of that story, Ryan Graves also shared this one with the committee as well.
In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, I believe 8:45 in the morning. Later in the evening, post-sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off. And this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans for Safe Aerospace. I have not seen what they've described. This object was estimated to be almost the size of a football field, and I have not seen anything personally that large.
So there you go. And now here's some insight into why these respected members, commander even, of the United States military would put their reputations on the line to publicly report their UFO sightings to Congress and to the world. And so in this testimony sequence, you're going to hear first from Representative Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin. Then you'll hear from Commander Fravor. Then you'll hear from Ryan Graves. And then Representative Andy Ogles of Tennessee will ask questions directed at all three of the whistleblowers. And don't worry that you haven't been introduced to the third whistleblower yet. You'll learn all about him soon enough.
Do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
Yes, and here's why. The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had, and you could put that anywhere. If you had one, you captured one, you reverse engineered it, you got it to work, you're talking something that can go into space, go someplace, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave, and there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
You two?
Well, I would also like to add, from a commercial aviation and military aviation perspective, we deal with uncertainty in our operating space as a matter of our professional actions. Identifying friend from foe is very important to us. And so when we have unidentified targets and we continue to ignore those due to a stigma or a fear of what it could be, that's an opening that our adversaries can take advantage of.
Mr. Graves and Fravor, in the event that your encounters have become hostile, would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
Sir?
No.
Is there any indication that these UAPs could be essentially collecting reconnaissance information, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Grush?
Fair assessment, yeah.
Mr. Fravor?
Very possible.
Is it possible that these UAPs would be probing our capabilities? Yes or no, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Grush?
Yes.
Fravor?
Definitely.
Is it possible that these UAPs are testing for vulnerabilities in our current systems?
Yes.
Yes. Possible.
And the Pentagon already seems to have agreed with them. So here's Ronald Moultrie again. He's the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security. And then you're also going to hear from Scott Bray, the Deputy Director of U.S. Naval Intelligence, in their May 2022 testimony. And then you're going to also hear from Scott Bray while he answers questions posed by Representative Raha Krishnamurthy of Illinois.
We know that our service members have encountered unidentified aerial phenomena. And because UAPs pose potential flight safety and general security risk, we are committed to a focused effort to determine their origins. Our effort will include the thorough examination of adversarial platforms and potential breakthrough technologies, U.S. government or commercial platforms, allied or partner systems, and other natural phenomena.
The basic issues then and now are twofold. First, incursions in our training ranges by unidentified objects represent serious hazards to safety of flight. In every aspect of naval aviation, safety of our air crews is paramount.
There have been no collisions between any U.S. assets and one of these UAPs, correct?
We have not had a collision. We've had at least 11 near misses, though.
And I assume we've never discharged any armaments against a UAP, correct?
That's correct. Second, intrusions by unknown aircraft or objects pose potential threats to the security of our operations. Our aviators train as they would fight. So any intrusions that may compromise the security of our operations by revealing our capabilities, our tactics, techniques, or procedures are of great concern to the Navy and the Department of Defense.
There's no communications or any kind of communication signals that emanate from those objects that we've detected, correct?
That's correct.
And have we attempted to communicate with those objects?
No.
So we don't even put out a alert saying, U.S. Identify yourself. You are, within our flight path or something like that. We haven't said anything like that.
We've not put anything out like that. Generally speaking, for example, in the video that we showed earlier, it appears to be something that is, unmanned. Appears to be something that may or may not be in controlled flight, and so we've not attempted any communication with that.
Out of everything I heard in these hearings, this was the thing that I found to be the hardest to believe. And just wait until you hear what's coming, and you'll understand what a statement that really is. But how is it possible that of all of these sightings, and there have been hundreds of them, how is it possible that no one in the military has tried to communicate with these objects, especially if there have been near misses? I am really struggling to believe that, especially knowing that some members of the military are from Boston. Because, you know, Bostonians will communicate while navigating around others using all kinds of voice projection methods and hand gestures if others wait an extra 2 seconds at a green light. So there's no way that they're going to stay silent when playing chicken with E.T. And so I'd really like to see some follow-up on that when Pentagon officials are inevitably hauled back into Congress, because there's also no way that this UAP whistleblower hearing is going to be the series finale. And I do think that this inquiry is going to expand beyond the Pentagon as well. And so here's Ryan Graves again, and he's going to answer questions posed by Representative Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, Representative Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin, and then you'll hear from Commander Fravor again before we go back to Ryan Graves.
Recognizing the need for action and answers, I founded Americans for Safe Aerospace. The organization has since become a haven for UAP witnesses who were previously unspoken due to the absence of a safe intake process. More than 30 witnesses have come forward, and almost 5,000 Americans have joined us in the fight for transparency at safeaerospace.org. The majority of witnesses are commercial pilots at major airlines. Often, they are veterans with decades of flying experience. Pilots are reporting UAP at altitudes that appear above them at 40,000 feet, potentially in low Earth orbit or in the gray zone below the Kármán line, making inexplainable maneuvers like right-hand turns and retrograde orbits or J-hooks. Sometimes these reports are reoccurring, with numerous recent sightings north of Hawaii and in the North Atlantic. Other veterans are also coming forward to us regarding UAP encounters in our airspace and oceans. The most compelling involve observations of UAP by multiple witnesses and sensor systems. I believe these accounts are only scratching the surface, and more will share their experiences once it is safe to do so.
With the FAA, to your understanding, pilots that are seeing this, commercial airline pilots, are they receiving cease and desist letters from corporations for coming forward with information in regards to safety for potential airline passengers?
I have been made privy to conversations with commercial aviators who have received cease and desist orders.
So the American public should know that corporations are putting their own reputations on the basic, not the line, but ahead of the safety of the American people. And I think, would you agree with that statement?
It appears so.
Okay.
Are pilots that you interact with as part of your organization, do you feel adequately trained and briefed on how to handle encounters with UAPs?
No. Right now, military witnesses to UAP have limited options for reporting UAP. But more concerning is that commercial aviation sector has not adapted to the lessons that the military has implemented. The military and Department of Defense has stated that UAP represent a critical aviation safety risk. We have not seen that same language being used in the commercial markets. They are not acknowledging this risk. Right now, we need a system where pilots can report without fear of losing their jobs. There is a fear that the stigma associated with this topic is going to lead to professional repercussions, either through management or perhaps through their yearly physical check. So having a secure system, reducing the stigma, and making this information available through the public is going to reduce the concerns that aircrew have.
It's a travesty that we don't have a system to correlate this and actually investigate. So if you took the East Coast, there's coastal radars out there that monitor our air defense identification zone, so out to 200 miles. They can track these, so when you see them, they could actually go and pull that data and get maneuvering. And instead of just having the airplanes, there's other data sources out there. And I've talked to other government officials on this. So you need a centrally located repository that these reports go to. So if you just stuck it in DOD, you wouldn't get anything out of the Intelligence Committee because they have a tendency not to talk. But if you had a central location where these reports would come in, not just military, but also commercial aviation, because there's a lot of that going on, especially if you talk to anyone that flies from here to Hawaii, over the Pacific, they see odd lights. So I think you need to develop something that allows you a central point to collect the data in order to investigate.
There needs to be a location where this information is centralized for processing, and there needs to be a two-way communication loop so the operators on the front end have a feedback and can get best practices on how to process information, what to do, and to ensure that their reporting is being listened to. Right now, there is not a lot of back and forth. And I think we need both transparency and the reporting. We have the reporting, but we need to make sure that information can be promulgated to commercial aviation as well as the rest of the populace.
So both of them, one representing pilots in the private sector and one a Navy commander, both of them recommended a central office that would collect and coordinate all UAP reports and data. And it's important to note that it's not just U.S. airspace and U.S. pilots and U.S. national security at risk here. And so here's Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland posing a question to Ryan Graves. And then you'll hear the Pentagon's Scott Bray answering questions posed by Representative Brad Wenstrup of Ohio in his testimony in May of 2022.
You've identified these as taking place on the East Coast. Is it just on the East Coast where these encounters have been reported?
No. Since the events initially occurred, I've learned that the objects have been detected essentially where all operations, Navy operations, are being conducted across the world. And that's from the All-Domain Anomaly Resolutions Office reporting.
Allies have seen these. China has established its own version of a UAP task force, so clearly a number of countries have observations of things in the airspace that they can't identify.
And do we share data with some, with all? Are they sharing with us?
We share data with some, and some share data with us.
But not necessarily all that have publicly reported something?
That's correct.
Okay.
And speaking of reporting, the Pentagon last year at least acknowledged that there's a problem. So here's Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence Scott Bray in 2022, followed by Ronald Moultrie, who again is the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security.
Since the early 2000s, we have seen an increasing number of unauthorized and or unidentified aircraft or objects in military-controlled training areas and training ranges and other designated airspace. Reports of sightings are frequent and continuing. We attribute this increase in reporting to a number of factors, including our work to destigmatize reporting, an increase in the number of new systems such as quadcopters and unmanned aerial systems that are in our airspace, identification of what we can classify as clutter, mylar balloons, and other types of air trash, and improvements in the capabilities of our various sensors to detect things in our airspace.
We also understand that there has been a cultural stigma surrounding UAP. Our goal is to eliminate the stigma by fully incorporating our operators and mission personnel into a standardized data gathering process. We believe that making UAP reporting a mission imperative will be instrumental to the effort's success.
The direct result of those efforts has been increased reporting, with increased opportunities to focus a number of sensors on any objects. The message is now clear. If you see something, you need to report it. And the message has been received.
But where does the reporting go once it's received? Well, here's Ronald Moultrie, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, and he's going to be followed by Representative Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin, who is the chairman of the House Oversight Committee's Subcommittee on National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs.
To optimize the department's UAP work, we are establishing an office within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. That office's function is clear: to facilitate the identification of previously unknown or unidentified airborne objects in a methodical, logical, and standardized manner.
The National Defense Authorization Act of 2022 established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, to conduct or to coordinate efforts across the Department of Defense and other federal agencies to detect, identify, and investigate UAPs. However, AARO's budget remains classified, prohibiting meaningful oversight from Congress.
On April 19th, 2023, 3 months ago, the Senate Armed Services Committee Subcommittee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities held a hearing with the head of that new office, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, otherwise known as AARO. And this was a hearing that was not aired on C-SPAN. Testifying in that hearing was Sean Kirkpatrick. He's the director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, and he's been the director since it opened in early 2022. Before becoming the head of the Office of Flying Aliens, Sean Kirkpatrick was the Deputy Director of Intelligence at the U.S. Strategic Command, and he also served as the Director of National Security Strategy on the National Security Council, and he also put in some time on the Space Force. Now, in this summary of his testimony, he's going to list off a bunch of abbreviations, as military dudes tend to do, and while I do think you'll know some of them, like NASA and the FBI, here's some of the ones that you may not know. So, the OSI stands for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He'll also mention the DOE, which is the Department of Energy. And he'll also mention the IC, which is the intelligence community, as in, welcome to the IC, bitch. There's like 4 elder millennial chicks that are going to get that stupid joke. And I just want you to know, you are my people. But anyway, here's Sean Kirkpatrick's testimony about Arrow. Here's his testimony about its mission, how it executes that mission, and Sean Kirkpatrick's long-term vision for Arrow. Is this office going to be the central repository for reporting UAP that Ryan Graves and Commander Fravor said that we need? Let's find out.
Arrow is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military personnel, specifically Navy and Air Force pilots. The Arrow team of more than 36 experts is organized around 4 functional areas: operations, scientific research, integrated analysis, and strategic communications. Consistent with legislative direction, Arrow is also carefully reviewing and researching the U.S. government's UAP-related historical record. When previously unknown objects are successfully identified, it is Arrow's role to quickly and efficiently hand off such readily explainable objects to the intelligence, law enforcement, or operational safety communities for further analysis and appropriate action. In other words, Arrow's mission is to turn UAP into SEP, somebody else's problem. I want to underscore today that only a very small percentage of UAP reports display signatures that could reasonably be described as anomalous. The majority of unidentified objects reported to Arrow demonstrate mundane characteristics of balloons, unmanned aerial systems, clutter, natural phenomena, or other readily explainable sources. There are emerging capabilities out there that in many instances, Russia and China, China in particular, are on par or ahead of us in some areas. The adversary is not waiting. They are advancing, and they're advancing quickly. If I were to put on some of my old hats, I would tell you they are less risk-averse at technical advancement than we are. Right? They are just willing to try things and see if it works. Are there capabilities that could be employed against us in both an ISR and a weapons fashion? Absolutely. Do I have evidence that they're doing it in these cases? No, but I have concerning indicators. While a large number of cases in our holdings remain technically unresolved, this is primarily due to a lack of data associated with those cases. Without sufficient data, we are unable to reach defendable conclusions that meet the high scientific standards we set for resolution, and I will not close a case that I cannot defend the conclusions of. How are we going to get more data? We are working with the Joint Staff to issue guidance to all the services and commands that will then establish what are the reporting requirements, the timeliness, and all of the data that is required to be delivered to us and retained from all of the associated sensors. That historically hasn't been the case, and it's been happenstance that data has been collected. We will need to prioritize collection and leverage authorities for monitoring all domains within the continental United States. Arrow's ultimate success will require partnerships with the interagency, industry partners, academia, and the scientific community, as well as the public. For those few cases that have leaked to the public previously and subsequently commented on by the U.S. government, I encourage those who hold alternative theories or views to submit your research to credible peer-reviewed scientific journals. Aero is working very hard to do the same. That is how science works, not by blog or social media. We are bringing in all of our interagency partners. So NASA is providing a liaison for us. I have FBI liaison. I have OSI liaison. I have service liaisons. Half of my staff come from the IC. Half of my staff come from other scientific and technical backgrounds. I have DOE. And so what we're trying to do is ensure, again, as I make UAP into SEP, they get handed off to the people that is their mission to go do, so that we aren't duplicating that. I'm not going to go chase the Chinese high-altitude balloon, for example. That's not my job. It's not an unknown, and it's not anomalous anymore. Now it goes over to them. So the vision is, at some point in the future, you should not need an arrow. If I'm successful in what I'm doing, we should be able to normalize everything that we're doing into existing processes, functions, agencies, and organizations, and make that part of their mission and their role. Right now, the niche that we form is really going after the unknowns. I think you articulated it early on. This is a hunt mission for what might somebody be doing in our backyard that we don't know about.
So, is Aero going to be the central repository for reporting UAP that Ryan Graves and Commander Fravor said we need? No, I don't think so. Because first of all, it sounds like Aero is really only concerned about the military pilot sightings. And Sean Kirkpatrick's long-term vision for the office he heads is for it to eventually no longer exist. As if they're going to figure out what Chinese technology all of these aircraft are and close up shop someday with some backslaps for a job well done. In my opinion, Aero, especially headed by this guy, a former National Security Council guy who sees the Chinese lurking around every corner, in my opinion, Aero is not the solution here. I think we need something to be created within the FAA, within the Federal Aviation Administration, which can collect information about unidentified flying things from all of the sources, whether they are military or private, and whether they're spotted by an American or by a pilot from somewhere else in the world. And I have to tell you that right now, Congress is working on a major FAA reauthorization bill. It's due by the end of the year. And so there is a perfect opportunity right now for something like what Graves and Fravor recommended to be created by this Congress, at least if concerned voters decide to dial up their 3 members of Congress and request it. Because Aero just ain't it. At least not with this leadership anyway. But let's move on. Now that you know what Aero is, let's get to the testimony that I know you've been waiting for. This is the testimony of David Grush. Now, I'm going to let David Grush introduce himself because the way he describes his own background and resume may have some significance that's lost on little old civilian me. But I want to give you a detailed explanation of who this guy is because, to be honest, when I sat down to watch this hearing, this is what I was expecting. But then I looked into the witnesses' backgrounds and found a naval commander and David Grush. And David Grush is no quack. So David Grush is a former Air Force officer with numerous awards and decorations for his participation in secret missions. I know he served at least in Afghanistan. He also served as an intelligence officer for 14 years and achieved a status of a GS-15 civilian, which is the military equivalent of a colonel. In his intelligence officer career, he served in the National Reconnaissance Office, where he served as a senior intelligence officer. And in that job, he wrote the daily briefings for the director of the office. Now, the reason that's significant is that to write those briefings for the head of the office, he had to know all of the information. And he did have access to information at the top secret/secret compartmented information level, which is the highest classification level. And in his position, he also represented the National Reconnaissance Office to the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, the UAP task force, which was what the military had before it created Aero. David Grush represented the NRO to the UAP task force from 2019 to 2021. After that, David Grush served at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which is a part of the Defense Department, where he served as a Senior Intelligence Capabilities Integration Officer. And in that position, he was the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency's co-lead for UAP analysis, and he served as their representative to the UAP task force from late 2021 until July of 2022. Now, David Grush resigned from the government, from the Defense Department's National Geospatial Intelligence Agency specifically, on April 7th, 2023. So that was just 3 months ago. And it was also 12 days before Sean Kirkpatrick testified in the Senate Arrow hearing. And David Grush filed an official whistleblower complaint to the Congressional Intelligence Committees and to the Department of Defense's Inspector General. In filing his whistleblower complaint to Congress and to the Inspector General 3 months ago, David Grush's lawyer is Charles McCullough, who is the former intelligence community Inspector General. That is not an easy guy to get to serve as your lawyer if you are a quack. And the former Intelligence Community Inspector General Charles McCullough has been lawyering for David Grush for quite a while because in May of 2022, over a year ago, Charles McCullough filed a disclosure of urgent concern detailing months of retaliation that David Grush had suffered while still working for the Defense Department. Because before going to Congress and the Inspector General, David Grush filed a classified complaint in July of 2021 concerning the withholding of information from Congress. He filed that classified complaint to the Department of Defense's Inspector General. So that's a long way of saying that before going to Congress and to the public, David Grush tried to report this stuff to the Defense Department and to keep it in-house. I also think it's worth knowing that Charles McCullough's successor as the intelligence community's Inspector General, his successor found that the complaint about retaliation within the Defense Department to be, quote, credible and urgent, unquote. And a year ago, he forwarded the complaint about the retaliation against David Grush to the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, and to the intelligence committees in both the House and the Senate. So, now that you know who this guy is, that's quite a resume. Let's get into his testimony. Now, this is going to be a long testimony sequence, and in it, David Grush is going to answer questions posed by Representative Anna Paulina Luna of Florida, Representative Jared Moskowitz of Florida, Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, and during his testimony, David Grush is going to do annoying abbreviation things, and so you should also know that when he mentions the DepSecDef, that means the Deputy Secretary of Defense. When he mentions the Gang of Eight, that is the 8 leaders in Congress who get classified intelligence. And they are the top 2 leaders from both parties, from the House and the Senate. And they are the top 2 leaders of both parties on both of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. David Grush is also going to mention SAPs, and that is an abbreviation for Special Access Programs. And these are programs that have access restrictions, which means that SAPs are secret programs. And then finally, he's going to mention IRAD, which stands for Internal Research and Development. IRAD are costs that private companies are allowed to charge the Department of Defense for research and development. So it's taxpayer money that private companies get to choose what to do with. All right, you ready? Here's David Grush.
My name is David Charles Grush. I was an intelligence officer for 14 years, both in the U.S. Air Force, both active duty, Air National Guard, and Reserve, at the rank of major, and most recently from 2021 to 2023, at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, at the GS-15 civilian level, which is the military equivalent of a full bird colonel. In the U.S. Air Force, in my National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, reservist capacity, I was a member of the UAP task force from 2019 to 2021. I served at the NRO Operations Center on the Director's Briefing Staff, which included the coordination of the Presidential Daily Brief and supporting a variety of contingency operations, which I was the Reserve Intelligence Division Chief backup. I was my agency's co-lead in Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena and Transmedium Object Analysis, as well as reporting to the UAP Task Force, UAPTF, and eventually, once it was established, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. I became a whistleblower through a PPD 19 urgent concern filing in May 2022 with the Intelligence Community Inspector General. Following concerning reports from multiple esteemed and credentialed current and former military and intelligence community individuals that the U.S. government is operating with secrecy above congressional oversight with regards to UAPs. My testimony is based on information I've been given by individuals with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to this country, many of whom also have shared compelling evidence in the form of photography, official documentation, and classified oral testimony to myself and my various colleagues. I have taken every step I can to corroborate this evidence over a period of 4 years while I was with the UAP task force and do my due diligence on the individual sharing it. This is because of these steps, I believe strongly in the importance of bringing this information before you. In 2019, the UAP task force director asked me to identify all special access programs and controlled access programs, also known as SAPs and CAPs, we needed to satisfy our congressionally mandated mission, and we were direct report at the time to the DepSecDef. At the time, due to my extensive executive level intelligence support duties, I was cleared to literally all relevant compartments and in a position of extreme trust, both in my military and civilian capacities.
You received prior approval from the Defense Department to speak on certain issues, correct?
Correct, through DOPSR, DoD Pre-Publication and Security Review, and I just want to remind the public, they're just looking from a security perspective. These are my own personal views and opinions, not the department's.
Okay, I'm asking that, though, mainly because I think that there are many people that would like to discredit you, so it does bring a certain amount of credibility to your testimony.
I'm required by law to do that as a former intelligence officer, or I go to jail for revealing classified information.
Yeah, we don't want you to go to jail.
I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, to which I was denied access to those additional read-ons when I requested it.
Do you have knowledge or do you have reason to believe that there are programs in the advanced tech space that are unsanctioned?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say that they're above congressional oversight, what do you mean?
Complicated question. So there's, some, I would call it abuse here. So congressional oversight of conventional special access programs. So I'll use Title 10, so DOD as an example, right? So 10 U.S. Code Section 119 discusses congressional oversight of SAPs, discusses the DepSecDef's ability to waive congressional reporting. However, the Gang of Eight is at least supposed to be notified if a waived or waive bigoted unacknowledged SAP is created, and that's public law. I have concerns based on the interviews I conducted under my official duties of potential violations of the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR.
Which private corporations are directly involved in this program? How much taxpayer money has been invested in these programs, to your knowledge?
The specific corporations I did provide to the committees in specific divisions, and I spent 11 and a half hours with both Intel committees.
How does a program like that get funded?
I will give you generalities. I can get very specific in a closed session, but misappropriation of funds and
does that mean
self-fund.
Does that mean that there is money in the budget that is said to go to a program, but it doesn't, and it goes to something else?
Yes, I have specific knowledge of that. Yep.
Do you think U.S. corporations are overcharging for certain tech they're selling to the U.S. government, and that additional money is going to programs?
Correct, through something called IRAD.
Okay.
When it comes to notification that you had mentioned about IRAD programs, we have seen defense contractors abuse their contracts before through this committee. I have seen it personally, and I have also seen the notification requirements to Congress abused. I am wondering, one of the loopholes that we see in the law is that there is, at least from my vantage point, is that depending on what we're seeing is that there are no actual definitions or requirements for notification. What methods of notification did you observe? Like when they say they notified Congress, how did they do that? Do you have insight into that?
For certain IRAD activities, I can only think of ones conventional in nature. Sometimes they flow through certain, I'll just say, SAP programs that have cognizant authority over the Air Force or something, and those are congressionally reported compartments, but IRAD is literally internal to the contractor, so as long as it's money, either profits, private investment, et cetera, they can do whatever they want.
To put a finer point on it, when there is a requirement for any agency or company to notify Congress, do they contact the chairman of a committee? Do they get them on the phone specifically? Is this through an email to hypothetically a dead email box?
A lot of it comes through what they call the PPR, Periodic Program Review process. If it's a SAP or Controlled Access Program Equity, and then those go to the specific committees, whether it be the SAS, CASC, HISI.
Thank you.
You probably can't name names, but what agencies or organizations, contractors, et cetera, do we need to call in to get these questions answered, whether it's about funding, what programs are happening, and what's out there?
I can give you a specific cooperative and hostile witness list of specific individuals that were in those.
And how soon can we get that list?
I'm happy to provide that to you after the hearing.
Super.
So what I'm hearing from David Grush, after listening to his testimony at least 10 times, is that there are secret programs being funded with taxpayer money and being hidden from Congress in violation of the law. The secret programs seem to be funded by private corporations that overcharge the Defense Department, a department that, by the way, has failed every audit that has ever been attempted. And then the private corporations are allegedly using the excess profits that they get from the Department of Defense to fund the secret programs, hiding it all as internal research and development. And during his time representing 2 agencies on the UAP task force, and while holding the highest level of security clearance, David Grush was told by intelligence officers, some of whom were directly involved with these secret programs, allegedly, that the secret programs were related to UAPs. And so now, here's what David Grush told Congress under oath that he has learned about the secret UAP programs. And in his testimony sequence, we're going to jump around between questions posed by Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee, Representative Robert Garcia of California, Representative Jared Moskowitz of Florida, Representative Eric Burleson of Missouri, Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, and Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland. And there are a few more abbreviations that you may need to know. And so when he mentions an NDA, that is a non-disclosure agreement, which is a contract that prevents someone from speaking out about something like, aliens being real and being hidden from Congress. And he's also going to mention a SCIF, which is a sensitive compartmented information facility, which is essentially a spy-proof location used to share classified information. Okay, here comes the good stuff. This is Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Right. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself of non-human origin craft?
Yes, I personally interviewed those individuals. I've actually never seen anything personally, believe it or not. So.
Okay. Can you give me the names and titles of the people with direct firsthand knowledge and access to some of these crash retrieval programs, and maybe which facilities, military bases the recovered material would be in?
I can't discuss that publicly, but I did provide that information both to the Intel committees and the Inspector General.
And we could get that in the SCIF if we were allowed to get in a SCIF with you. Would that be probably what you would think?
Sure, if you had the appropriate accesses, yeah.
These aircraft, have they been identified that they are being produced by domestic, military and contractors? Is there any evidence that that's what's being recovered?
Not to my knowledge, plus the recoveries predate a lot of our advanced programs that I previously am witting of. So,
are you aware of any individuals that are participating in reverse engineering programs for non-terrestrial craft?
Personally, yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you know any that would be willing to testify if there were protections for them?
Certainly closed door and assurances that breaking their NDA, they're not going to get administratively punished for so. Yeah.
Mr. Grush, I might have asked this before, but I want to make sure. Do you have any personal knowledge of someone who's possibly been injured working on legacy UAP reverse engineering?
Yes.
Okay. How were they injured? Is it something like a radioactive type situation or something we didn't understand? I've heard people talk about Havana syndrome type incidences. What was your recollection of that?
I can't get into specifics, but you could imagine assessing an unknown unknown. There's a lot of potentialities you can't fully prepare for.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
You've said that the U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors. Yeah.
And have you seen any of the bodies?
That's something I've not witnessed myself.
Mr. Grush, you've been able to answer in great detail on certain questions, and then other things you say you're not able to respond to. Can you just explain where you're drawing the line and what's the basis for that?
Yeah, based on my DOPSR security review and what they've determined that is unclassified.
I see. So you're answering any questions that just call upon your knowledge of unclassified questions, but anything that relates to classified matters you're not commenting on in this context.
In an open session, but happy to participate in a closed session at the right level. Yeah.
They're here. The aliens! Oh my God. Maybe they're here. That's a big fat maybe. Because while this testimony was obviously the most entertaining congressional testimony of all time, the Pentagon testified otherwise. Now, again, this testimony predates this hearing, so these guys have not gotten a chance to respond directly to David Grush's allegations. But here is what the Pentagon's U.S. Naval Intelligence Deputy Director Scott Bray told Congress in May of 2022. And in this testimony, Scott Bray is going to answer a question posed by Representative Raha Krishnamurthy of Illinois.
How about wreckage? Have we come across any wreckage of any kind of object that has now been examined by you?
The UAP task force doesn't have any wreckage that isn't explainable, that isn't consistent with being of terrestrial origin. When it comes to material that we have no material. We have detected no emanations within the UAP task force that would suggest it's anything non-terrestrial in origin.
I just want to point out a few things here, as gross as it feels to defend the Pentagon. But Scott Bray said that the UAP task force doesn't have any wreckage, and that actually does align with David Grush's testimony, because Grush said that as a representative to that task force, he was denied access to the wreckage. And so the task force itself definitely didn't have it, and no one is claiming that it did. And since that testimony occurred, the task force has morphed into Arrow. And so here's what the head of Arrow, Sean Kirkpatrick, had to say about the presence of little green non-men flying among us when he testified to Congress 3 months ago in April of 2023.
I should also state clearly for the record that in our research, AARO has found no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity, off-world technology, or objects that defy the known laws of physics. In the event sufficient scientific data were ever obtained that a UAP encountered can only be explained by extraterrestrial origin, we are committed to working with our interagency partners at NASA to appropriately inform U.S. government's leadership of its findings.
And that is problematic testimony, because here's Representative Anna Paulina Luna of Florida following up on that with David Grush just this week.
Okay, on the 19th of April, Dr. Kirkpatrick, head of AARO, had said that he did not find any evidence of UAPs. You also stated that you had, in your interview, that you had briefed him on information that you were uncovering, but that he did not follow up with you. Were the items that you divulged to him pertinent to national security?
Yes, him and I had a classified conversation in April 2022 before he took over AARO in July 2022, and I provided him some concerns I had.
Do you know why he might not have followed up with you?
Unfortunately, I cannot read his mind. I wish he did. I was happy to give sage counsel to him on where to look when he took the helm of AARO.
So David Grush said under oath that he gave at least some of this information to Sean Kirkpatrick personally in April of 2022. That's a full year before Kirkpatrick testified to Congress, which means someone's lying to Congress. And one member of Congress addressed the testimonial discrepancies. Here's Representative Virginia Fox of North Carolina.
Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of AARO, previously testified before Congress that there has been, and I quote, no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity or of, quote, off-world technology brought to the attention of the office. To your knowledge, is that statement correct?
It's not accurate. I believe Dr. Kirkpatrick mentioned he had about 30 individuals that have come to AARO thus far. A few of those individuals have also come to AARO that I also interviewed, and I know what they provided Dr. Kirkpatrick and their team.
Okay.
I was able to evaluate that information.
I need to go on.
Sure.
His statement is accurate, came from a direct quote. And this contradiction is a perfect example of why we need to inject transparency into our government. And for another example, look no further than the pitiful response to the Chinese spy balloon debacle earlier this year. The Biden administration's initial inability to address the object grew into a continuous series of embarrassments. After news of the balloon reached the mainstream media, we were assured that the balloon...
So, instead of trying to find out what David Grush told Sean Kirkpatrick and investigate possible perjury to Congress by either Kirkpatrick or the man sitting right in front of her, Virginia Fox just declared that Kirkpatrick's statement was accurate because he said so. And then she used the rest of her time, and we're talking many minutes here, blubbering about the balloon and how much she disapproves of Biden. That's the closest we got in this hearing to someone trying to figure out why the testimony of Grush and AARO's director were so different. And Representative Virginia Fox, once again, just have to point this out, gets highlighted on the show for being one of the worst. Even in a hearing as refreshingly unpartisan as this one was, because you have heard from Democrats and Republicans today, this was an amazingly unpartisan hearing. But you can always count on Grandma Fox for 5 minutes of awful. But regardless of the congressional failure to even attempt to investigate the perjury, Sean Kirkpatrick himself did publicly respond to the testimony that David Grush provided. Kirkpatrick did so by releasing a public letter the day after the hearing on July 27th. And in that letter, Kirkpatrick said, quote, some information reportedly provided to Congress has not been provided to AARO, unquote. And he said, quote, contrary to assertions made in the hearing, the central source of those allegations has refused to speak with AARO, unquote. Kirkpatrick also repeated what he told the Senate in April, saying in the letter that, quote, Aero has yet to find any credible evidence to support the allegations of any reverse engineering program for non-human technology, unquote. So, someone's lying, and I have no way to know who it is. The good news is that I would bet my life savings that this investigation is only just beginning in this Congress, which I'm also surprised to say I welcome. I thought this was going to be a total circus of a hearing attended by a panel of wingbats, but it wasn't that at all. And man, would I love to be a member of Congress right now and play 7 Minutes in Heaven with David Grush in a skiff, because I want to know everything that he couldn't say in this hearing. Which brings me to the testimony about classifying information about UAP. Because I do think that we're eventually going to get information about this stuff, at least more information. And not just like a document drop, but like systematically, I think we'll get more information. And here's why I think that. So first, here's Ryan Graves testifying this week, followed by Scott Bray of the Pentagon last year. And then that testimony will be followed by Sean Kirkpatrick testifying about Aero's classification decisions. And this testimony was from just a few months ago.
Excessive classification practices keep crucial information hidden. Since 2021, all UAP videos are classified as secret or above. This level of secrecy not only impedes our understanding, but fuels speculation and mistrust.
If UAP do indeed represent a potential threat to our security, then the capabilities, systems, processes, and sources we use to observe, record, study, or analyze these phenomena need to be classified at appropriate levels. We do not want potential adversaries to know exactly what we're able to see or understand, or how we come to the conclusions we make. Therefore, public disclosures must be carefully considered on a case-by-case basis.
Once we have an approved web portal to hang the unclassified stuff, we will downgrade and declassify things and put it out there. In the meantime, we're putting a lot of these on our classified web portal, where we can then collaborate with the rest of the community so they can see what's going on.
So Aero, which is a new agency, it intends to have a public website for unclassified information, but they don't have it up and running yet, so everything is going into their existing classified website. And so because I know that is going to change, I am optimistic that we're going to get to see more from Aero, at least, sometime in the near future. Even though in general, overclassification of all kinds of information is a major systemic problem. And there is a specific amendment that we may want to vocalize support for that could take us at least a small step towards solving this problem. Here's Representative Garcia, and I did not write down his first name or where he's from, but who cares?
We know the Senate is taking up an amendment to their defense authorization bill, which will create a commission with broad declassification authority, and we should all agree that that is an important step.
The NDAA is a work in progress, and so if you want that amendment to survive the process of merging the House and Senate NDAA versions, now is an excellent time to contact your members of Congress about it. Now's an excellent time to contact your members of Congress about all of this, really. Because I want to end this episode with some human-to-human relations stuff that just isn't sitting right with me. Especially not after producing the Twitter Files episode and personally having a decade-long career in independent media that has featured more and more censorship as the time has gone by. And so here's Ronald Moultrie again. You've heard from him multiple times today, and this is also from his May 22 testimony. He was testifying in his position as Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, which again is a position that he has held since June of 2021. And the dots that I haven't connected for you yet is that in that position, during that time period, I'm pretty sure that he was one of David Grush's superiors. Because in this position, Ronald Moultrie has authority over the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which is where David Grush worked. And so here's his testimony about the public's access to and discussion of UAP-related information. And in this unedited clip, he's going to be responding to questions posed by Representative Darren LaHood of Illinois.
So one of the concerns that we have is that there are a lot of individuals and groups that are putting information out there that could be considered to be somewhat self-serving. We're trying to do what's in the best interest of, one, the Department of Defense, and then two, what's in the best interest of the public, to ensure that we can put factual-based information back into the mainstream and back into the bloodstream of the reporting media that we have, so people understand what's there. It's important because we are attempting, as this hearing has drawn out, to understand, one, what may just be natural phenomenon, two, what may be sensor phenomenology or things that were happening with sensors, three, what may be legitimate counterintelligence threats to places that we have or bases or installations, or security threats to our platforms. And anything that diverts us off of what we have with the resources that have been allocated to us, send us off in these spurious chases and hunts that are just not helpful. And they also they also contribute to the undermining of the confidence that the Congress and the American people have that we are trying to get to the root cause of what's happening here, report on that, and then feed that back into our national security apparatus so we are able to protect the American people and our allies. So it is harmful, it is hurtful, but hopefully if we get more information out there, we'll start to lessen the impact of some of those spurious reports.
So just taking that a step further, that misinformation, false narratives, manufactured, so what are the consequences? Are there legal consequences? Are there examples that you can give us where people have been held accountable by this misinformation or disinformation?
I can't give you, any examples where somebody's been legally held liable for putting something out there, but...
Well, I guess what's the deterrent from people engaging in this activity?
I don't know. I don't have that answer. That's something that, welcome the dialogue with Congress to talk about that with the members who, help legislate those laws to say what should be the legal ramifications that we could use to potentially hold individuals accountable, whether it be citizens or information that might be injected into our media by other forces or other countries, if you will.
So this Pentagon official, one of David Grush's likely ex-superiors, is suggesting that Congress create a law creating legal ramifications for citizens and media that put out information that the Pentagon doesn't approve of, which gives me a general vibe for how he views disclosures to the public. And I couldn't stop thinking about that clip when I heard this testimony by David Grush, given in response to questions posed by Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland and Representative Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
Mr. Grush, what about you? What was your experience after you came forward?
Well, it's only been about 2 months or so I guess my experience has been overwhelming support from former colleagues of mine that have privately messaged me, and I do appreciate that. But I do have knowledge of active planned reprisal activity against myself and other colleagues, and it's very, very upsetting to me.
Coming from where?
Certain senior leadership at previous agencies I was associated with.
Have you faced any retaliation or reprisals for any of your testimony or anything on these lines?
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say in detail because there is an open whistleblower reprisal investigation on my behalf, and I don't want to compromise that investigation by providing anything that may help provide somebody information. But it was very brutal and very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally, to be quite frank. Yeah.
Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes. Personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
Now, I want to be crystal clear that I'm not accusing Ronald Moultrie of anything. But whether he was personally involved in retaliating against David Grush or not, I do think that he exhibited a pretty clear disdain for disclosures of this stuff. And he did so as a representative of the Defense Department requesting legislation to punish citizen and media speech. And I just can't help but wonder how people in the Defense Department, like Ronald Moultrie and others, would treat people within their own ranks that speak out to the public if they want legal punishments for citizens and the media. And 2 inspectors general of the intelligence community have found David Grush's reports of retaliation from within the Pentagon to be credible. And so while I don't know what to believe here, I am finding it really hard to trust the Pentagon. And Arrow is a part of the Pentagon. And for what it's worth, Christopher Mellon, who's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Christopher Mellon has also said that he's been given information by people who, quote, do not trust the leadership of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office established by Congress, unquote, which could explain why these people are going to people like Chris Mellon and David Grush instead of going to Arrow under the leadership of Sean Kirkpatrick. And so, going forward, I will obviously be watching any future hearings. But after these hearings, I've got to tell you, I'm taking this UFO UAP stuff far more seriously than I ever have before. I was fully expecting to dismiss these whistleblowers, but I can't. Their resumes, the way they conducted themselves, the way they all said, I don't know, when they didn't have answers to questions, they just seemed very credible to me. I can't dismiss these people. And after at least 2 years of allegedly, quote, brutal, unquote, retaliation from people within the most powerful military in the world, and he seemed to infer that he has at least heard rumors of people who have been murdered in this area of inquiry. You know, for David Grush to testify publicly like this and to promise so many specific details to Congress the way he did, how could he do that if he didn't have anything? Why would he do that? And so my tinfoil hat is securely fastened. I have concluded nothing, but I am so down for this ride. And so if you are also down to ride down this rabbit hole with me, all I can tell you for right now is stay tuned. It was only a couple weeks ago that I really wasn't enjoying this job, and now I have the best job in the universe. This episode was so fun to make. So thank you to everyone who makes this job of mine possible. This was so entertaining, and I don't know. I am curious to know your thoughts about this, but don't get mad at me for either believing too much or not believing enough. Like, I don't know, but I am curious to hear your thoughts on what you heard. And are you excited that there's aliens? Maybe? Are you scared? Do you still think it's all bullshit? Like, I'm dying to know. So yeah, please send me your messages. I'd love to hear them. I also got a message this week from our executive producer. I don't think I can call him a new one, but Robert Carpenter is now going to be an executive producer on 2 episodes. And for those of you not in the know, here in Congressional Dish, we have a most valuable episodes list on congressionaldish.com so that new listeners can figure out what to listen to. And that list is controlled by the number of executive producers that are on each episode. You get an executive producer credit by paying $535. And every time your contributions add up to that, then you get a credit. You put it on your favorite episode, and that episode moves up the list. And these are real producer credits too. So if in any way it helps you, you did pay for a significant portion of an episode's production. And so I will vouch for you if needed. It's never actually happened, but we do keep track of all of this stuff. So yeah, these are real credits and they're very much appreciated. And so Robert Carpenter sent in this message. He said, I love the new most valuable episodes feature, and I thought I should finally use my EP credit for being a long-standing supporter to boost a couple of my favorite episodes. I'm not exactly sure how much I've contributed over the years, but I've tried to maintain about $20 a month since 2016. So that probably gets me to 2. Please check my math. And it did, sir. Thank you very much. He said, I'd like to be the EP on the following episodes. Congressional Dish 218, Minerals Are the New Oil, and Congressional Dish 124, The Costs of For-Profit War. It's tough to choose between so many great episodes, but I thought both of those were excellent deep dives on issues that aren't being covered adequately by anyone else, but are each important in their own way. The clips you've pulled for Congressionalist 218, minerals are the new oil, still replay in my head when I see U.S. politicians flailing about and blaming everyone but themselves for becoming irrelevant to the future of the world. Thanks for all of the great information and never stop doing what you do, Robert. Well, Robert, thank you for supporting the show and making its continued creation possible. This episode, like I said, was really fun. I will not be surprised at all if this gets some EP credits coming up quick, because I had such a good time with this one. It's such a fun topic, and it's more serious than I ever expected it to be. Just when I was bitching about nothing interesting happening in Congress, this falls into my lap. It was well timed. So over the last, 4 or 5 episodes, I've been talking about this episode about the censure of Adam Schiff. I think that'll be the next episode. It's already done, but I think that'll be the next episode, barring something awesome happening again. But yeah, that's what you can look forward to for the next episode. Very different from this one. This one was way more fun. Although it is interesting and essential for us to look at the partisan nonsense sometimes. And so that's when the next episode's going to be. Until you hear my voice again, thank you so much for supporting the show, and I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite of any in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. With the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, in the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it flies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. Now we're not keeping quiet.
These bills represent common sense, bipartisan solutions that actually solve problems.